On today's Hashi, I'm discussing Jerome Powell's testimony to Congress and mortgage applications. Today is Wednesday, July 10th, 2024. I am Byron Lazine, and the Hot Sheet starts now. Welcome into the Hot Sheet. Today it is a J. Pow day. Jerome Powell yesterday had his testimony, his semi-annual testimony with the Senate committee. Today he will obviously be sitting in front of the House. I would expect and anticipate, as we've seen in the past, that not much will change between his testimony in front of the Senate to the House. So today's comments, or yesterday's comments that we're going to cover today, are really important because this is how he feels right now. The markets have already had a reaction to them. Okay, we'll cover what's going on with the 10-year and what the market feel is based on Jerome Powell's commentary. Okay, so there are during the when he's sitting in front of these Senate committees, everyone gets all the senators get their little time slot there and they can ask questions. We've seen this a million times. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 senators that asked a question that related to housing. Okay, so we're going to go through all 5. We've got the timestamps broken down inside of your Hot Sheet show notes, which you can get on side of BAMX. We have the full transcript for you, as we do every time we break down a Jerome Powell day. But before we do that, we'll just take a look at the overall headlines. Okay, the overall headlines, which we saw in his teased out comments yesterday in the Hot Sheet, were that he says holding rates high for too long would jeopardize economic growth. I think this is important because it's really the first time this year that we're hearing Jerome Powell say, hey, we probably need to get closer to cutting rates soon. We don't want to jeopardize economic growth in any way. He has these concerns that if we hold them too high, too long, that would happen. Reducing policy restraint too late or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. Obviously, the end of last week, we saw unemployment tick up to 4.1%. Unexpectedly, that is. It was sitting at 4% before that. It was expected to remain at 4%. The numbers come out and it's 4.1. So FOMC, one of their mandates from Congress is that it doesn't get high, right? You maximize employment as much as you can. There's a lot of skeptics about the 4.1% unemployment number as it is. A lot of skeptics believe this is made up with a whole bunch of part-time work. So there's some critics of the number, okay? His goal is to maximize employment. That's not only his goal, it's his mandate. All right, let's go into the timestamps here. We've got the first 15 minutes into his testimony before the Senate committee. Again, this is a semi-annual address. So this isn't something that came out of nowhere. This is on the calendar for the head of the Fed, the chairman of the Fed, which is Jerome Powell, to conduct this testimony twice a year. Starts with the Senate committee. Then again today, he'll sit in front of the House committee. So Jerome Powell testifying before the Senate committee. The first discussion came in about 15 minutes as it relates to housing, because that's what we're going to focus on here, with Senator Jon Tester from Montana. So let's go to Senator Tester's question, and then we'll get Powell's response here.
Appreciate your work. Look, regardless of where I go in the state of Montana, housing is a big issue, whether it's Billings or Butte or Bozeman or Busby or Big Sandy, it doesn't matter. Larger towns to medium-sized towns to small towns, housing is a huge issue. And I think it's a huge issue all over the country, and correct me if I'm not correct in that. And I was wondering how the housing challenges fit into the overall economic picture that you're seeing.
So we We do pay a lot of attention, and I would agree with you. We have significant housing issues in the country, and we had them before the pandemic.
Okay.
Certainly the
So this is something you've heard, and we'll continue with the rest of his statement there, but this is something that we've heard Jerome Powell say a lot recently when he's had a housing question. He keeps going back to, we had issues with housing pre-pandemic. We had issues pre-pandemic. He doesn't want that the housing recession that we are still going through, the reduction of transactions, to be blamed on him or the committee. He points to the fact that we had years of an inventory issue that was building up and then was exacerbated during the low interest rate environment that was the pandemic. He doesn't want to blame the lack of inventory today solely on the low 2 to 3% interest rates that we had in the recovery from the pandemic. He doesn't want the two to be tied to each other, which is why he continues to lead with that. We had significant, his word were, we have significant housing issues in the country, and we had them, meaning significant issues, pre-pandemic, a la 2017, 18, 19. We had less inventory than we needed during those years. Let's continue on with the rest of his answer to Senator Tester.
The pandemic has created new distortions, and monetary policy works through interest-sensitive spending. There is no more interest-sensitive spending than buying a house and having a mortgage. So, for sure, our tighter policy is having an effect on economic activity in the housing sector. But I would also say the best thing we can do for housing is to succeed in getting inflation down to 2% on a sustainable basis, so that rates can come down, so that the housing market can get back to what was the pre-pandemic normal, which is to say still a housing shortage, but not dealing with the kinds of specific things we're dealing with now.
All right.
So
before we go to
let me
Tester's
drill down a
follow-up.
little
So Senator Tester is going to follow up, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. But I think he's right. I think he's right that the best thing that can happen to the housing market would be inflation down to 2%. Not because I think 2% is a magical number, because remember, when inflation comes down to 2%, prices don't drop back to what they were in 2019 and 2020. Prices don't go backwards. They remain where they are. Okay, so if you buy milk and you're like, geez, milk is double the price of what it used to be. It's not like when we get inflation back to 2%, milk goes down to whatever a gallon of milk was. I don't buy milk, but I'm sure it's very expensive, and I'm sure it was much cheaper a few years ago. Milk doesn't go back to that price of a few years ago. Okay, inflation to 2% means it's going to keep going up that 2%, give or take, each year. Okay, so prices aren't coming down when we get inflation down to 2%. But why is it important for housing? It's because Jerome Powell and the FOMC are going to start cutting rates, or that they will have already started, right? That's something that they've been pretty upfront about, that they will start cutting rates before we get to the 2%, once they have enough belief that we're heading in that direction and we're going to end up at 2%. So that's why getting to their magical number, I mean, 2.5 might be a fine number, but they've set it at 2%. Somebody picked that. And now we've got to get there or be on a path to getting there before they're willing to cut rates. Cutting rates is something, and let me know in the live chat, do you agree cutting rates is going to open up a lot of sellers that have been sitting on the sidelines and create more transactions, more fluidity in the market? Or do you think it really exacerbates the inventory crisis? All right, let's go to Tester's follow-up here, and then we'll move on.
I'm speaking not necessarily from a housing cost interest, and you're correct on the things you just brought up. I'm speaking more from a standpoint of economic growth, and that there are plenty of small businesses, schools, hospitals, Main Street businesses that can't hire people, they can't expand because there simply is no place for them to live. How does that fit into your economic outlook metrics?
This is a great question.
Because I think it's, from my perspective at least, I think it's limiting the opportunity for expansion. It's limiting the opportunity for entrepreneurs business startups? And does that fit into the economic picture that you look at?
So our mandate is for stable prices and maximum employment. And again, I think for housing supply, the best thing we can do is get inflation under control so that rates can come back down, so that we can have a more normalized set of rates and a more normalized housing system. But I think policies to increase housing supply are really not so much in the hands of the Fed, they're in the hands of legislatures, state and federal.
Boom. All right. So he kind of just,
that if
he just kind of stuck it back to Mr. Tester in a nice way, saying, hey, like without saying it, he's saying, hey, buddy, Mr. Tester, your mandate to me, you being Congress, me being the head of the Fed, is that we get inflation to 2% and that we maximize employment. Nowhere in the mandate that Congress sets for the Federal Reserve does it say increase housing supply. It's not Jerome Powell's job. So this is one place I have to continue to defend Jerome Powell. It's not his job to make sure that there's enough housing supply. And we know that if we want prices to come down, if we want affordability, which is what Mr. Tester is talking about, and it's a great question because it's a huge problem. It's a great question to be presented and for people to talk about and bring awareness to. Maybe not necessarily a great question for Powell because it's not his mandate. But if we want affordability to have the best doctors and teachers and lawyers in a certain community, then yeah, we even for those jobs, we need to have affordable housing, okay, so that all can live in a community. But affordable housing only happens when there's enough supply. Okay, when there's more supply than will meet demand, prices will cool. And so that's what Powell's talking about there. His question, though, going back to Tester's question, small businesses, schools, hospitals, healthcare. I know for out of experience down in Naples, Florida, as an example, my wife went to a luncheon with some of the parents at the school, some of the moms at the school put this luncheon together with somebody who was on one of the healthcare boards or whatever. And they're talking about pediatric care in Naples. Okay. Naples has added over 1,000 kids to their school system, to all their schools over the last couple of years. Southwest Florida, fancy pants town, all of that. And adding 1,000 kids in a short period of time to all of the schools has an impact, a ripple effect on a lot of different sectors, and healthcare being one of them. Pediatric care, healthcare for children. At this luncheon, the number from this healthcare board person on the board of, I think, the hospital down there said that in order to meet demand, Naples, Florida has 40 less pediatric offices than they need right now. Not just doctors, offices, practices, 40 less. And the number one reason was that doctors don't want to move to Naples because whatever, benefit or boom they're going to have to their business because of this shortage in pediatric doctors is going to be washed away by the housing costs. It's like, hey, I'm living in Western Pennsylvania, and I get, I've got all these amenities here. I got the best house. I'm the king, the big fish in a small pond. I don't want to move to Naples and give up all of my perceived profits to just live in a house that's less desirable than the one I already have. And so you have this cost of living issue for professionals to go there. All right. So great questions from Tesla. Let's go to, we're not going to finish with him. Let's go to Sherrod Brown from Ohio, who thank you for that. I think we ran into an ad, but Haley's going to fix that. You know what? I'll read through Sherrod Brown and then we'll go to you can get us over to LaFonza Butler from California next. Okay. Unless you got Brown. You got Brown ready? Go to Brown. Go to Senator Brown from Ohio.
I think you understand that. Housing, higher interest rates are making housing more unaffordable. Higher rates are supposed to lower cost, yet housing prices continue to soar. By keeping rates high, the Fed ignores the economic reality of the millions of Americans struggling to make ends meet and get ahead. Let me ask you 3 quick yes or no questions, if you would answer that way. Since late 2022, when the Fed began raising rates, has the volume of housing sales decreased?
I believe it has, yes.
Since late 2022, has the median home price increased?
I believe it has.
Since late 2022, have monthly mortgage payments become more affordable or less affordable for home buyers?
Less affordable.
Okay, thank you. In short, despite housing sales declining, the median price for a single family home has increased by nearly $20,000. People are spending a greater share
We got all
of
this.
their income and mortgage payment.
And so, a lot of people on the internet thought that as home sales decreased, which they have since 22, he's absolutely right. The amount of transactions have decreased. Home sales, units, transactions, closings have dramatically decreased. That's the real estate recession that we're in. This reduction of transactions. A lot of people on the internet thought that would also bring a reduction in prices, and it hasn't happened. And he's right on the money here. In fact, he's just making a point, I guess, to Powell, that it's become so unaffordable. Home prices have gone up since 22, and mortgage payments have gone up. And so the quickest path, and we talk about supply, I was just talking about supply obviously being one of those things to bring prices down. The quickest path for affordability is obviously getting those rates down. Now we come into a problem like we did in early 22, where we had the lowest level of inventory ever. If rates come down, but sellers aren't willing to trade in their current rate, so they've got to come down enough where you get existing home owners into the marketplace, where you get as much inventory matching the demand or more inventory. That's when you really have a market that is working. Let's go to LaFonza Butler from California. This is just under an hour into the testimony, and LaFonza Butler has a question for Powell.
For America's next generation, given the severe shortage of affordable and available homes to buy, coupled with high interest rates, young Americans are continually unable to afford homes and are pushed into a rental market, driving rental costs up. So there is sort of trickle-down impact here. Recent Washington Post analysis showed that Gen Z is spending 31% more on housing than their millennial counterparts were 10 years ago after adjusting for inflation. How do you view, that was a long lead in to just ask the question, how do you envision or view the interest rates of today and the monetary balancing, policy balancing that the Fed is doing on contributing to the future generation predicament if we are to extrapolate the conditions of today?
So our job, of course, is the whole economy and inflation for the whole economy. And the absolute best thing we can do for younger people is to restore price stability, so that as we benefited from, I graduated from college in 1975, near the end of the big inflation period. So during most of my adult life, inflation has just been not a factor. And that means, stable interest rates, relatively low interest rates. We want to get back to that. And that is what the Fed's job is that we're not supposed to look at the housing market as separate from the overall economy. In the meantime, though, there's no question that higher interest rates are making it harder to buy homes in the short term. But in the longer term, this is the best thing particularly for younger people who are not yet in the housing market.
All right. So, not much of an answer there. She asked I thought she asked a great question. You have a future generation that's, in her words, in this predicament. And if we were to extrapolate the conditions of today, what is that going to mean for them? And Jerome goes to, well, I graduated college in 75. I haven't had to deal with any of this stuff. It's so fascinating that when I looked at the survey that was done, and we talked about it here. I know we definitely talked about it on Knowledge Brokers podcast, but I believe we also discussed it here on the hot sheet. When I look at that survey of how generations, what's most important to them for voting in November, okay, like one of the few ways you can actually try to have an impact on the economy. One of those few ways is your vote. Gen Z, which Senator Butler mentioned, Gen Z spending 31% more on housing than their millennial counterparts were 10 years ago after adjusting for inflation. Gen Z and millennials, number one issue for what they're considering voting in November for the presidential election was the economy. Jerome Powell's generation, when he talks about from 75 till today, I haven't had to deal with inflation. Okay, the baby boomer generation, their number one issue that they were voting on was democracy, which I struggle to even find a definition of what people say when they're like, we need to save our democracy. So boomers aren't even voting on what's most important to their children and their grandchildren, which is the economy. And it's fascinating. And part of the reason is because they own 1/7 of the world's wealth. They haven't had to deal, like Jerome Powell just said, with inflation in their life, right? When they were a kid or getting out of school, when for Jerome Powell, 75 was near the end of the big inflation period. And what's happened from that period to today? We've seen home prices dramatically go up. The last 4 decades, home prices have gone up 35% or more in every decade, mostly 40%. Okay, so home prices, the stock market boom. And so it's just like, when I look at that survey of how baby boomers are considering their vote in November, it's like, wake up. I love LaFonza Butler's question because, like, what's the plan if we're going to extrapolate today's conditions for the future on prices, on affordability, on the economy, on the finances of Gen Z and millennials who got to go and try to get us out of $34 million in debt? Okay, speaking of the presidential election, the next question in the testimony that is as relates to housing was from J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is in the presidential election news because he's, according to Vegas's ticker, he's in the top 2 running to be named the VP candidate in the Trump campaign. J.D. Vance is from Ohio, and the senator asked a question related to housing. Let's take a look at where his mind is on
more
housing.
services inflation. Given the current low inventory of affordable housing, the inflow of new immigrants in some geographic areas could result in upward pressure on rents as additional housing supply may take time to materialize. With labor markets remaining tight, wage growth has been elevated at around or above 4%, still higher than the pace consistent with our 2% inflation goal, given trend productivity growth. The Bank of England, I believe, produced a recent report on this issue in the United Kingdom, obviously a different economy in a different country. But what do you see as the relationship, in particular, given that housing is such a big driver of the inflation that we've seen over the last few years? As Senator Haggerty said, the highest in 40 years. What role do you see illegal immigration playing in driving up housing costs, which, of course, is a main driver of inflation for American citizens?
Let me quickly start by echoing your first comment, which is we don't comment on immigration policy, but we do comment on inflation. So I would say this. Many people came into the country over the last couple of years, many of them through asylum requests, and went to work. Labor supply increased a great deal. It's not, there's no clear answer, but my sense is that in the long run, immigration is kind of neutral on inflation. In the short run, it may actually have helped because the labor market got looser because there were more people. But to you're talking about housing specifically. There will be, I'm sure there are places in the country where new people coming into the country, I'm sure you can find places and they exist where that will have contributed to an already tight housing market. But overall, in terms of the aggregate inflation, I wouldn't say it's a driver one way or the other.
Okay.
So I want
to JD Vance's question, interesting question. I don't really think super relevant on this testimony. I think it's, he right now, personally, he is in a race to try to be named a potential VP candidate for this election in November. So everything he does, you got to look at it through that lens. It's like, okay, this guy's trying to be named a VP candidate. So he's asking a question that has a lot of these political issues wrapped up into it. He's talking about immigration. What I will say about his angle. And it was funny. Powell said, we don't comment on immigration, but yet he went on and commented about immigration. So that was kind of interesting to see Powell do that. What I'll say about this issue with immigration is it makes the inventory supply issue that we have so much more important, because the last thing we want to do, I mean, obviously there's going to be an immigration issue that's going to continue to be debated, and there's going to be new policies, I'm sure, that are brought to the table from now to November, and they've got this whole potential illegal immigration issue on the table. There's no question, though, that America needs to be immigration friendly. Even both presidential candidates, no matter which one you like or which one you're voting for, they've both said this in different ways. And it's acknowledged by almost everybody with common sense in America. We need to be immigration friendly. We need to bring people into this country. We don't want to end up like China, which is looking at a bunch of empty real estate buildings because people don't immigrate to the country. They've got an issue where in 20, 30 years, they're going to be on the population decline, and that has real impact on their economy. If we want to have a thriving economy, the dollar wants to stay at the top, we need to have a population that grows in this country. There's no question about it. And so if we're going to have an immigration system that works, and we're going to bring in, great talented people to join our workforce, we're going to need housing, or it's going to get out of control. So the legislators, like Jerome Powell said earlier, he's like, it's your job, Senate, House, to create opportunities for housing supply. We need more housing supply. And I think that that highlights that. So we had one more question, and Senator Warnock of Georgia. This is the lengthiest conversation surrounding housing with Senator Warnock of Georgia's questions. We'll go to that question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The latest monetary policy report shows inflation in housing costs is gradually easing. That's good news. But many Georgians still feel the sting of unaffordable homes and mortgages. And one reason for this, you and I have discussed this, is that we aren't building enough houses. 2022 study published in the Journal of Economic Geography found that for every 10% increase in the housing stock, rents decreased by 1%. We've discussed this issue, particularly the effects of housing supply on housing costs. And we agreed that while the Federal Reserve does not control housing supply, it can help create the environment that encourages the construction of new housing, particularly affordable housing. Chair Powell, how has the Fed been working to foster an environment that encourages home construction, and what, in your view, are the challenges that remain?
So, I mean, in the long run, the absolute best thing we can do for the housing market and for the economy is to sustainably bring inflation back down so that people aren't talking about it anymore. And it's just assumed by everybody in their daily lives that inflation will be around 2%. So we don't need to talk about it, which is where we were for a long time. We want to get back to that. Interest rates can come down then, and the housing market can return to the state it was in before the pandemic, which was to say really tight. We don't have enough housing, and that's not really a monetary policy issue. In the short term, though, I would say how tight monetary policy weighs on the housing market. The policy works through interest-sensitive spending, and housing is definitely at the top of the list of interest-sensitive spending. So we understand that we're suppressing, not suppressing, but our higher interest rates have led to lower housing starts and lower activity in the housing market. But we're doing that to get back to 2% inflation for the whole economy, so that the housing market can be on a better foundation.
Well,
Hold on.
yeah, and related to that.
And so we'll go on to some of his follow-ups here. Senator Warnock actually I love when they bring some data, when the senators don't just, walk into this thing and like, I'm going to do some type of political grandstanding here, and they have some data backing up their position. This 2022 study, the Journal of Economic Geography, found for every 10% increase in housing stock, rents decreased 1%. And so he's looking for a pathway to reduce the cost of housing. Unfortunately, that's the path of least resistance for policymakers. It's like, okay, let's go get more rental properties. And now, while I agree with Stacy Sutter, who I did an interview with a couple of weeks ago, it's here on the main channel over on the video tab. Stacy Sutter, who was the largest REO broker in Houston during the REO boom. Go check out that interview if you haven't done so. I agree with Stacy. One of his comments that he made that, hey, not everybody should buy a home. Some people simply can't afford it. On the flip side, I'd love to see, when we say, let's increase supply, have a balance between affordable homes or condos or townhomes to purchase or apartments to purchase versus just increasing supply on the rental side. Okay, because I am of the belief that you're going to have a lot more financially stable families. It's going to impact generations to come if they're able to go in there and buy a home and not just rent. Powell obviously gives his answers, his talking points, that this isn't monetary policy, what Warnock is asking. He even, alluded to that, saying, hey, you can't control supply. So let's go to Warnock. Where does he follow up with this and try to get more out of Powell? Let's see how he does here.
When you have these high interest rates, of course, you see across the country, but particularly in a state like Georgia, these institutional investors.
Here you go, Mark.
Who are coming into the space, and they're buying houses in all cash, boxing out first generation home buyers. And of course, the conditions for them doing that improve to their favor with higher interest rates. Would you agree with that assessment?
I know some of that's happening. I don't know that higher interest rates make it. I mean, some of they're working with.
So you got higher interest rates and you got institutional buyers who can purchase it all cash. Doesn't that further?
But they have to borrow the money at higher interest rates. I'm just saying higher interest rates doesn't make their investment any cheaper. And notwithstanding, I understand it's a sensitive issue, and in most markets, it's still a pretty small portion of the outstanding housing stock. But it's not an issue. It's not an issue for us. They're a legal buyer of housing. Our job is really the whole economy. I mean, it's more of a question for legislatures.
He's right.
So how can the Fed better deploy its monetary tools to ensure that we are meeting key inflation objectives like housing affordability?
I think the best thing we can do is is kind of what we think we've been doing, which is to move carefully as we think about loosening policy and make sure that we do that when we've got greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably down toward 2%. We're also keeping a close eye on the labor market, and if we see unexpected weakening there, then we could respond to that too. But that's really the best thing we can do for the whole economy, and very specifically for the housing market too.
You well point out that you're limited in terms of your influence there, and there is a role for Congress, to be sure, which is one of the reasons I wanted to be on this committee to introduce a down payment toward Equity Act with my colleague Senator Butler. This bill would help first generation home buyers compete with Wall Street institutional investors by helping with down payment costs, closing costs, and costs to reduce interest rates. I look forward to continuing productive conversations with you and looking at how we can make housing more affordable for all Americans. If I'm running out of time here, but one of the other concerns that I maintain is with respect to reducing the racial wealth gap. Is this issue around home appraisals. And the Fed is part of the interagency task force on property appraisal and valuation equity. What expertise and perspective has the Fed brought to this task force? How are you responding to this issue of home appraisals?
So, as you know, we've been an active participant in that task force, and we bring all of the expertise we have in the housing market, as well as regulatory, supervisory, and economic expertise generally. as we look at that. And I'll also say that our strongly held view is that discrimination has no place in the banking system, and that includes appraisals and other valuations.
I agree with that. And quickly, I was glad to see that CFPB and other agencies recently finalized a rule that creates strong anti-discrimination standards for automated home evaluations. The Fed has not yet approved this rule. Why not? And does the Fed plan to do so?
Sorry, why do we?
You've not yet approved the rule that was made that was suggested by the CFPB. They finalized the rule.
But do we? Sorry, I didn't. I'm not aware that it's a rule that we have to finalize too. Is that the case?
That is my understanding.
Let me follow up with you on that. I'm not aware of that.
Follow
Okay.
up. Let me
Thank
circle
you.
back, Jay Powell. Circle back on that one for us, would you, Jay Powell? It probably sounds like it's not a rule because remember, there's certain things that don't fall in the Fed's lap. I guess we'll wait for the follow up there from Powell to Warnock. Probably be in some kind of an email from somebody on Jay Powell's team to somebody on Warnock's team, and we'll never hear about it again. Listen, some good stuff there from Warnock, opening up again discussion, but not really anything that Powell can answer. A lot of the concerns that Warnock has are more controllable with him and his buddies on Capitol Hill, senators and members of the House. So he has more control over a lot of the stuff that he was asking about. I see the comment here, the concerns about just helping with down payment and closing costs would not help in regards to pricing. That's probably true, just based on the price points that impacts, right? You already have a competitive environment there, and you already have people bidding. You have an event-like price anytime something's at the median price point in this country or below, which creates a competitive environment, which continues to push price up on those lower prices, right? Like, why do we see the Midwest, when we talked about it yesterday, go up so much in home values? Well, it's because they're already really low and people are seeing opportunity there. And so they're going and moving into that sector of the market in pricing. So the best way to really help this issue is for, all these guys, Warnock, Vance, Tester, Butler, all these folks on this committee who have a passion about the housing issue. Senator Brown from Ohio, all of the five of them that asked the question to Jerome Powell as it relates to housing, they can actually make the biggest impact if they focus on releasing regulations on building more supply in exchange for supply that meets a lower cost sale. Okay, if you reduce costs on building in this country in exchange for building a product that's not Toll Brother average price of $1 million and meets where most people need to buy homes, you'll get closer to solving the housing problem. But they can't wrap their minds around making a deal like that, or they haven't shown the ability to put a plan together as of yet that would meet those concerns. And right now, here's the headline today. Suddenly looks like there's too many homes for sale, but we all know that that's quite not right. And it gets into the supply of newly built homes appears to be way too high, right? That's like 8-9 months of inventory right now in newly built. Existing home sales is up 200,000. So as inventory increases year off of the bottom of last year, we all understand that, well, it's not quite right that there's too many homes all of a sudden for sale, because there's not nearly enough homes that meet the demand of the price point of people at which that want to buy. If we just keep building new homes in that Toll Brothers price point, well, we're not going to be meeting the demand of the home buyer today. And that demand of the home buyer has been going down considerably the last 3 years. Here's this week's update on the purchase index. Mortgage Banker Association purchase index actually increased from 1 week earlier, up 1%. But this is down 13% lower than the same week a year ago. Okay, so we've continued to see that as we go week over week. Is it higher or lower than last year? For 2+ years now, we've seen it be lower. That demand for mortgage applications from buyers, which speaks to the overall demand of buyers in the market feeling like they are priced out. Price on the 10-year today, based off of these Jerome Powell comments yesterday, is acting a little bit more favorable. We're down to 4.289. We've seen over the last 24 hours a slight decline before a little bit of an increase early this morning here on the 10-year Treasury. Yesterday's 30-year fixed remained flat with the day before at 7.01. Love to see, some further commentary from Jerome Powell that he's concerned about rates higher for longer. That might lead to some short-term mindset from investors that could ultimately lead to a 10-year dropping a little bit further and maybe get us into the high sixes on the 30-year fix, because that's the biggest impact in the short term that can be had on the buyers in the market. The biggest impact you can make over the next 7 days on your business is joining us for BAM BBQ a week from today. That's right, just next week on Wednesday, July 17th from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern, 9 to noon Pacific time. We're kicking off our third mega virtual event of the year. It's BAM Barbecue. Sam DiBianchi, first female ever on $1 Million Listing. Bravo. I'm going to be doing a fireside chat with her on the state of the housing market and some of the NAR settlement changes. She's a broker, an independent broker down in Fort Lauderdale. Also, Luke Acree from Reminder Media talking about converting leads with Facebook advertising. So if you want to put together a great Facebook advertising campaign, jump into the BAM BBQ free event. By the way, the link's in the live chat. It'll be in the show notes for everybody on the replay. It's completely free. Just sign up. BAMX members, you guys get a free replay. So if you can't make it, if you're a BAMX member, you're getting a replay for the whole thing. You can use code HOT to get into BAMX right now to get a discount on BAMX. Chris Smith we're giving away some of his books during the live event, conversion code, talking about exactly what we need to say in this market. Tom Toole on time management, Paige Steckling, listing videos, myself, Eric, the broke agent, Luca, the actually agents guy, is going to be moderating the deal here. Haley's laughing at Luca. Luca, we're laughing at you right now here on the hot sheet. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. And Jay Powell days are fun. We'll take a look at what he says today in front of the House. If there's anything relevant, we'll get into it tomorrow. But I know we get a lot more to cover tomorrow as well. Hope you guys have a great day. Go check out yesterday's Real Word Pod here on the live channel if you haven't done so already as well. Fascinating stuff around the forums. Brokers, boards, wake up. August 17th is going to be officially 1 month away next Wednesday when we kick off our BAM BBQ event. 1 month. Wake up. See you back here tomorrow on the hot sheet. Until then, toodaloo.